Hey guys, it's Kesara, and today I'm going to be doing my January reading wrap-up.
So as always, I'm going to start this off with my stats for the month, but I will have timestamps in the description so you guys can jump around a bit. For my book stats for the books that I read in January, as for genre, I read 8 fantasy books, 2 sci-fi books, 1 classic, 1 mystery, and 1 graphic novel. Within the fantasy genre, 1 of the books that I read was high fantasy, 2 were grimdark fantasy, 4 were urban fantasy, which surprises me because I always thought I didn't like urban fantasy, but it turns out I do, and 2 romance. For age range, I read 5 books for adults, 2 for new adults, 3 YA books, 2 middle grade, and 1 miscellaneous, which is a pretty wide range of ages. So that's actually really surprising because I normally read just all adult books. For source, I read 6 books that I owned, 2 from the Libby app, 1 from the Cloud Library app, 1 from Hoopla, and 3 from Audible. By medium, I read 3 books that were hardcover, 2 paperback, 2 ebooks, and 6 audiobooks, which is pretty typical of me. Well, not so much the ebooks, but the audiobook to non-audiobook ratio. And I'll put a little chart on the screen for my page counts. I was surprised the majority of the books, especially towards the beginning of the month, were really high page counts. So my average page count ended up being 428 pages. For star ratings, I'll again put a chart on the screen for that one. And my average star rating ended up being 4 stars, which is a bit lower than I typically want it to be, just because since I use quarter stars, I generally want my average rating to be above like 4.25 stars. Now we're gonna move on to my author/publisher stats. So I read 11 books that were written by women and 2 that were written by men, which surprises me again because normally I feel like it's closer to a 50-50 ratio. I also read 7 books by white authors, 2 by black authors, 1 by a Hispanic author, and 3 by Asian authors. I read 9 books that were from the US, and then 1 each from the UK, Iceland, China, and New Zealand. And lastly, for my publisher stats, specifically in published year, while I do have a pretty big range of years, I was surprised that I read 5 books from 2020, which kind of new releases, except it's now 2021, so they're kind of old too. But I also read 1 new release that was published in 2021.
So we're going to start this all off with my rereads for January. I did have 1 book that I reread in the month of January. I actually started it back in December, but I finished it in January, and that's The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. So I reread this in anticipation of The Burning God, which is the 3rd book in the Poppy War trilogy. This is the 2nd book in the Poppy War trilogy, and is by far my favorite book in the Poppy War trilogy. It is an absolutely fantastic book. It is following up on the events from the Poppy War. It picks up right after the Poppy War ends, and I don't want to say too much about it because it is a 2nd book in a series, but the Poppy War trilogy in general is one of my favorite series of all time. Highly recommend it. Such a really great Asian-inspired grimdark fantasy series that I think every fan of the fantasy genre should definitely pick up at some point. Oh, and of course, I ended up giving this one 5 stars. Really quickly, I do want to talk a little bit about my DNFs because in January, I did decide to go into a clean slate. So I had a few books from 2020 that were rolled over from like a few months ago that I had started, but I had a really busy like November and December, so I didn't really read very much in those months. So I had some books that were from like October that I had started reading in October that I was still like currently reading. So I decided to put all of my books from that time on pause, meaning I 100% plan to get back to them, but as of right now, I'm pausing those. So the first one was When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Nivo. This is a novella. I actually really like this author's writing, but I literally picked this up back in October, read like 2 pages, and like didn't continue on with it. So it's on pause for now. I will get back to it eventually when I'm in the mood for it, but I'm just not in the mood for it right now. And the other one was House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielinsky. I did read a little bit of this in January, but I feel like it was just a bit too much for me at the time. While I do enjoy this book while I'm reading it, it's one of those books that I feel like you have to be really into while you're reading it to like enjoy it, and I just was not enjoying it as much as I was back in October when I was reading it. I'm just not in the right mood for this, so I'm gonna put this on pause also until I get back into the right mood. I actually made some pretty good progress on it though. Like I'm like halfway through this book. It's one of those books that's really memorable, if that's how you put it. So like I'm pretty sure that once I get back to it, I won't have to reread like the first half. So I do 100% plan to get back to this, just not right away. And my last DNF is actually from my January TBR. It's a book that I was really excited for, but I just had tons of other books that I was more excited for at the time. So I didn't get around to finishing this book just because every time I went to pick it up, there was just something else that I wanted to read more. And that's The Invisible Library by Genevieve Cogman. So this is like a magical library slash multiple worlds type of historical fiction, which is just like everything that I would want in a book, but it just wasn't capturing my attention the way some of the other books I was reading at the time was. So I decided to put this on pause for now. I do plan to get back to this book eventually, and hopefully hopefully I'll end up liking it. So now that we've talked about my rereads and my DNFs, it's time to get into all of the rest of the book that I read in January. And always, I start with my lowest rated book and work my way up to my highest rated. And we're gonna start this off with Snowblind by Ragnar Jonasson. So I read this book for the Diversathon Readathon to read a book that was set in Iceland. I was excited for this because it's a thriller novel and I don't read very many of them, but I generally like it when I read them. I didn't realize this is not so much thriller as it is a detective mystery novel, which I don't like as much. Like, I very rarely pick up detective mystery novels. I still enjoyed it. I particularly liked the audiobook. I think the audiobook was really well done, and I think the novel is structured in a way that it lends well to audiobook, and I enjoyed that aspect of it. Also, I didn't have to like try and figure out how to pronounce their names because I would not have known how to pronounce their names. But it was just like a regular thriller novel to me. Like, there was nothing about it that really stood out to me. I didn't really get super attached to the characters. There weren't like a whole lot of like twists and turns that were crazy or anything like that. So I enjoyed it. It was a fun read, but there wasn't that much to this book, so I ended up giving it 3 stars. So the next book that I like to talk about is Emma by Jane Austen. I'm gonna be honest, I was a little bit disappointed in this one. I've come to expect that I'm going to absolutely love books by Jane Austen because of the last 2 books by her I ended up really loving, and I feel like this one was just kind of meh to me. I enjoyed some aspects of it. Like, I liked Emma's growth and character development in here, but I didn't feel very much for the romance, at least until very end. And I feel like the romance was a pretty significant part of this one, as opposed to some of her other ones where the romance maybe doesn't play as big as a role. I really enjoyed about half of this book. The other half I didn't care for that much. This might be one of those books that I reread in the future, but as of right now, I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. Not a bad book, but in my opinion, definitely not one of Austen's best.
So now I want to talk about the Tea Dragon Festival by Katie O'Neill. So this is the sequel to the Tea Dragon Society, which is a cute little middle grade fantasy graphic novel. I really enjoyed it. There's not very much to it, but it's cute and sweet, and it was just like a quick fun read. Like, I read it, I think, in less than half an hour, and it definitely made me want to drink some tea because it's about dragons who have like these leaves that make tea. But this one is actually about a real dragon, which I thought was really fun too. So I enjoyed that. It does have some really interesting world building, and I definitely love the artwork in it as well, and I ended up giving it 4 stars.
And the next book that I want to talk about is Across the Greengrass Fields by Shauna McGuire. So this is the 6th book in the Wayward Children series. It is one of the prequel series, and it's following a character named Reagan who grows up as a girl but learns that she's intersex, and after that she doesn't really fit in with her friends that well, so she finds a portal to this other world called the Hooflands, in which she gets to ride with unicorns and centaurs and all a bunch of different magical creatures. It was definitely a lot more magical than I was expecting from the Wayward Children series, but I really enjoyed it. It had some middle grade vibes to it that I really enjoyed because I absolutely love middle grade fantasy, and I enjoyed that aspect of it. But like pretty much all of the Wayward Children series, I also felt like it wrapped up a little bit too quickly, and I just wanted more from this. So while I did enjoy it quite a bit, it's probably not my favorite in the series, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. Next, I have to talk about From Blood and Ash and Kingdom of Flesh and Fire by Jennifer L. Armentrout. So I did not know really what to expect going into these books. I just knew that it was like highly romantic fueled fantasy, which is just what I was in the mood for at the time, and oh my gosh, do these books deliver on that. It was just absolutely perfect for the mood that I was in, and while I don't think these are like the best books of all time or anything like that, I enjoyed these immensely. I read the first book, I want to say, over the course of like a week. Mind you, I didn't have very much time, so I was reading like half an hour to an hour at night as I was trying to go to sleep. And then the second book, I had time, and I ended up finishing it like within 24 hours. Now, mind you, I did enjoy the first book quite a bit more than the second book. I think there were a lot of things in the second book that felt a little bit like a repeat of the first book, relationship-wise, even though like plot-wise, ending of the second book makes me really excited for the third book in the series. I'm super excited to continue on with this. It is such a fast-paced, fun fantasy that's filled with romantic tension that I just absolutely love. By the way, these are vampire novels. I'm reading vampire romance again. When did that happen? It's okay though. Like, it doesn't even feel like the old vampire romance, if you know what I mean. It doesn't have that like paranormal fantasy feel. It definitely has a little bit more of a high fantasy feel, and I really enjoy that aspect of it. I absolutely cannot wait for the next book in the series to come out. I'm so excited for it. It's just such a fast-paced, fun series that I could just lose myself in, fan that I enjoyed just so much. I ended up giving the first book, From Blood and Ash, 4 stars, and the second one 3.5 stars. So next we have How the King of Elfhame Learned to Hate Stories by Holly Black. I kind of picked this one up on a whim because I bought this back in November when it first came out, and I was really excited for it because I am a huge fan of the Folk of the Air trilogy. Like, it's not even rational at this point because I understand the series is not as good as how much I like it, but I just absolutely adore the series for like literally no reason at all. So because of that, I'm just total fangirling off on that series. So that's why I decided to get this book, because it is a series of short stories that starts before the beginning of the Folk of the Air trilogy and spans all the way till after, following Prince Carden and his journey throughout. Because most of the series, while Prince Carden is one of the characters, the actual protagonist is Jude, and I enjoyed this a lot more than I was expecting to. Now mind you, I don't think I learned anything that much from it that I didn't already know from the series, but I still really enjoyed this so much more than I was expecting to. Like, it was such a little fun read that I enjoyed, and I'm just a sucker for illustrated editions of things, and this is an illustrated book, of course, so it has some of the most gorgeous illustrations. I love this so much, so much. I am so happy I bought this book, and while it's not the best book ever, I still really enjoyed it, so I ended up giving it 4 stars. Next, I want to talk about A Sprinkle of Spirits by Anna Mariano. So this is the second book in the Love, Sugar, Magic series, which I picked up the first book in this series back in March of last year. I feel bad that I didn't continue on with the series because I absolutely loved the first book so much. I loved it so much. It's a middle grade fantasy series that's heavily inspired by Mexican culture, and the main character, Leonora, is a little mischievous, let's just put it that way, and she finds out that her family is a family of brujas, or witches, and they bake magic into cakes and cookies, all those sugary sweetnesses that they sell in their family bakery, and she kind of does things that she's not supposed to, at least in the first one. And then in this one, the antics continue, and I don't want to go too much into it because, again, it's a second book in a series, but it was absolutely fantastic. I loved every second of it. A nice little fun escapist middle grade fantasy that I really enjoyed, and I ended up giving it 4.25 stars. The next book that I'd like to talk about is Wild Seed by Octavia E. Butler. Butler honestly can do no wrong. I absolutely loved this. This was not at all what I was expecting, because this is about ancient gods. It's kind of like a love story between ancient gods. The entire series spans from the very distant past to the distant future. So this is the first book in the series. It's in the distant past, and I really like that aspect of it. But what I didn't really realize was they're not really gods. I mean, they're kind of people that have godlike abilities, which is really cool, to the point where they're immortal, which I really like. I don't want to say too much about it because I feel like this is the type of book that you have to go into blind. By going into it blind, you're going to absolutely love it because I really enjoyed it. I did get a lot of similarities from this book as Parable of the Sower. There were definitely some sort of the powers that seem similar to the powers that you find in Parable of the Sower, which is one of Octavia E. Butler's other books, but there were definitely other things about it that was absolutely fantastic. If you like anything with like shapeshifters, skinwalkers, body hoppers, things like that, you would probably absolutely love this. It is very cool and very creative. One of the most unique books I've ever read. I absolutely loved it, and I ended up giving it 4.25 stars. The next book that I want to talk about is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. So when I started out this book, I was like slightly disappointed because this book is super hyped up and everyone seems to absolutely love it, and I didn't love the premise of it. Like, to start out with, it's about a girl named Brie Matthews who goes into like an early college program, and it's kind of about this secret society, but it does have this mysterious twist to it where her mother recently died in a car accident, and she's not really sure if it was really an accident or not, or if these mysterious Legendborn are behind it. And so I love that aspect of it, and there are just so many twists and turns in here that are really great. I will say the atmosphere of this book is not what I would typically want to read from my fantasy, but the longer I read it, the more and more I absolutely loved it. This also has like Arthurian legends, which I don't read a whole lot of like Arthurian fantasy. That was an interesting aspect of this as well. I don't know how much I liked that aspect of it necessarily, but it was definitely done in a really creative way that I think was really well executed. So I liked that as well. I enjoyed this a lot, especially the ending. I absolutely loved the very ending. So because of that, I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. While it's not my favorite YA fantasy ever, it is definitely still worth the read. We are getting getting close to the end now, and of course, I have to talk about The Burning God by R. Kwong. Oh my gosh, this series is so fantastic. I absolutely enjoyed reading this book so much. It's not quite the finale that I was hoping for. Like, I do think in some ways it does raise the stakes over the Dragon Republic, but I feel like that's more of like the plot and like the action-wise, but not character-wise. I feel like the tension with the characters that was there in the Dragon Republic just wasn't quite there in The Burning God, but it's okay. I still really enjoyed every second of this. It's one of those series that I can't help but love, and the very, very ending. I loved it so much. I really enjoyed this. It's not my favorite in the series. It's actually probably my least favorite in the trilogy, but it's still 100% worth the read, and I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. And now, for hands down, the best book that I read in January, we have Death's End by Cixin Liu. Oh my gosh, this is one of the best books that I've ever read. Like, literally, this is probably one of my favorite sci-fi books. It is so unique and interesting. I absolutely loved every second of this. This is a chunky book, mind you, and it's not one of those books that you get like into the characters or anything like that. The thing that makes this book so great is scientific aspects of this book. Just the theories and the ideas that it spits out. It makes you think about what the world is and what the universe is and how all of that fits together. Just absolutely mind-blowing. I love this book so much. And while there is some good character things in here, I just absolutely love the way the author structures his novels, because there are scenes after scenes where you're not really sure what's necessarily going on. Like, you enjoy the scene and it's really interesting and really intriguing, but you don't really see where it's tying into the whole story until you get to the end and it's like, oh, I see it now. And it's just absolutely fantastic. Each book in this series, by the way, is completely different. They do tie together a little bit, especially the second and third books, I think tie together the most, but they're so different, but at the same time, they're just so absolutely perfect. I absolutely love this series so much, and I ended up giving this one 5 stars. So that is all I have for you guys. If you've read any of these books, let me know down in the comments, because I'd love to discuss with you guys. I post videos on Sundays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, so consider subscribing. And if you'd like to be notified as soon as I upload, you can click that little bell icon. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up to support my channel. All social media links are in the description down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.